Hello, romance book lovers. Welcome to Tales from the Heart. I am Jenna Harte, and each week I post new episodes from my stories of crime and passion. Right now, we're listening to With This Ring I Thee Kill, Book 3 of the Valentine Mysteries. This week is Episode 9, Chapter 9. Now, if you'd like to read along or get ahead in the story, you can get With This Ring I Thee Kill from your favorite ebook retailer, or you can save by buying direct from me. Now, With This Ring I Thee Kill is the third book in the series. If you missed Book 1, Deadly Valentine, you can listen by checking earlier episode postings, or if you'd like to read it, you can get Deadly Valentine for free at my website, jennahart.com. Book 2, Old Flames Never Die, is available in earlier episode postings as well, or available at your favorite ebook retailer, or you can grab it for less through my shop. Now, Tales from the Heart is posted to podcast platforms and YouTube each week. These episodes are edited to censor out any intimate content. If you'd like to have a version that includes the spicier bits, plus early access, behind-the-scenes information about the stories, bonus content, and more, please join me over at Ream Stories. You can learn more at reamstories.com/Jenna Harte. Now, never miss the mystery of romance by hitting the subscribe button, and remember that all the details and links you might need are just a click away in the description. Now, snuggle up, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Chapter 9. Tess decided it was a good sign that Daniel and Jack worked together behind her back. Maybe they'd become friends after all. But she made it clear to Jack that she didn't want him sneaking behind her back again. Daniel stood outside of Cameron's room waiting for Tess and Jack's arrival.
Before you go in...
It's okay, Daniel. She knows the situation.
I'm not going to represent her, and I'll tell her that,
Tess added. Daniel nodded, then stepped away from the door.
Did she say anything?
Jack asked.
She did. But she wants Tess to hear it from her. I'd like to sit in on that discussion as well, if it's all right with you.
Tess nodded.
I just want a few minutes with her alone.
Jack gave her arm a supportive squeeze as Tess took a deep breath, then pushed the door to Cameron's room open. She wanted to be mad at her friend's betrayal, but she found it difficult to believe her friend was guilty of anything more than falling for a bad guy. Still, she wasn't going to let friendship put her or Jack in any more danger.
Tess, I wasn't sure you'd come.
Cameron looked defeated. Her eyes were red, her eyelashes stuck together in a sure sign of crying.
I want to hear what you have to say, but not as your lawyer. I can't do that.
No, of course not. That's not why I asked the detective to contact you. I want to tell you what I know, to help, if I can.
Tess bit her lower lip and then said what she felt duty-bound to say.
You should consider getting a lawyer, Cam. At least one man is dead, and Jack would be too if he hadn't gotten lucky.
Tess saw tears pooling in her friend's eyes, but fought against being swayed by them.
I didn't do anything wrong except fall for the wrong man. I swear it, Tess.
Tess stepped closer to her friend. She wanted her to see how serious, deadly serious she could be.
I love you, Cam, but that man out there, Jack, he's my life and I'm his. I won't let anything or anyone take him away from me. If you do this without a lawyer and Daniel wants to arrest you, I'll support him.
Cameron nodded.
I understand. I'll tell you everything I know.
Tess waited a beat, handed Cameron a box of tissues from the bedside table, then went to the door to let Daniel and Jack know Cameron was ready to talk.
Tess, you have to believe me. I had no idea about the ring or what was happening to you.
Tess heard pleading in Cameron's voice, but wasn't ready to let go of her suspicion.
Except I told you about it yesterday and you didn't say a word.
I know, but I wasn't sure it was the same ring. I wasn't,
Cameron said, when Tess gave her a look that said she didn't buy it.
That's why I was looking it up today, learning more about it and Jack.
It is the same ring,
Jack said. Cameron nodded.
I'm pretty sure it is.
What's so special about it?
Tess asked.
For one, it's over 300 years old, and it was commissioned by Louis XIV, one of the greatest rulers of France. Some believe the blue diamond is a cutting from the French blue, although most experts don't buy this. The French blue...
We know it's the Hope Diamond,
Tess said.
Even if it's not part of the French blue, most who know about the ring think La Coeur Bleue was purchased at the same time as the French blue, that it was part of the same diamonds Louis bought from Tavernier.
La Coeur Bleue? It has a name?
Jack asked.
It means blue heart, so it's more of a description, though it sounds special in French, doesn't it?
Cameron answered.
So it's not as special as the French blue?
Tess asked.
Not as special, but still significant. The ring was made for a mistress. Her children by Louis XIV were legitimized, which is very unusual, and one of them eventually became king. I love that story.
Cameron scanned her audience. When she didn't get a response, she continued.
Then there are the legends, like the ring is magic.
Let me get this straight. Your buddy Tim and Cal are trying to kill Tess and Jack for a magic ring?
Daniel didn't hide his disbelief.
Not really. They want the ring to sell it. Tim doesn't believe or care about the history of items, only how much money they will bring.
How much are we talking about?
Daniel asked.
Several 100,000, maybe more.
Dollars.
Tess spun to Jack.
I didn't pay that.
Jack said.
Although you'd be worth it.
Tess gaped at him.
What is your relationship to Tim and Cal?
Daniel asked. Cameron sighed.
I told you before, I used to date Tim. That is until I discovered he was using me to find items to sell. In the last year, I found art or other items, many of which I brokered sales on that he later ended up selling again after he stole them.
So he has a history of murder and stealing?
Daniel asked.
Murder? I don't think so, but I can't say for sure.
She shuddered, and Tess wondered if she was realizing that she'd been in love with a murderer.
It will be hard to prove he stole anything. He makes sure the items appear legitimate.
Wouldn't hot items get more money because they're harder to obtain and unload?
Daniel asked.
Not necessarily. Some people don't care if the item is stolen, but they can't show it off if it is. Some buyers are willing to pay extra for it if they can show they bought the item legitimately.
How do you steal something and make it look like you bought it?
Jack asked.
There are many ways. When it comes to old items, there often are questions about ownership. Take the French blue. It was stolen during the French Revolution and is now in Washington, D.C., but you don't see the Smithsonian giving it back to France.
The Smithsonian didn't steal it.
Daniel said.
That's my point. Pass the item along a few times and ownership gets lost or skewed.
What was your part in the skewing?
Daniel asked. Cameron's eyes narrowed.
My deal was completely legitimate.
Then why are you here now?
He pressed. Cameron paused, and Tess could tell the answer would only make things worse for her.
I heard the ring was available again. I was surprised, because why wouldn't Mr. Orleans' heir not want his stuff? When I heard it was going to auction, I decided to come.
To get it and sell it again?
Daniel finished.
Yes.
Cameron said defiantly.
There is nothing wrong with that.
It's quite a coincidence that you sold the ring once already, then your boyfriend shows up trying to steal it, and you're here now trying to get it as well.
Cameron turned to Tess.
Il ne me croit pas.
C'est une histoire incroyable.
Tess answered.
Wait, stop.
Daniel demanded.
Speak English, ladies. This is an interrogation.
She doesn't think you believe her.
Tess said.
I told her it was quite a story to believe.
And it's true.
Cameron insisted.
The only thing connecting me to your ordeal is that I dated Tim, and he used me to find artifacts. I never worked with him on his schemes, and I'm not now. I would never...
She turned to Tess again.
You have to believe that, Tess. I would never resort to that. I don't have to.
You don't have to work at all.
Tess said.
Neither do you. Your trust is bigger than mine, but I see you're still a lawyer.
Touché, Tess thought.
What about the guy at the party who caused your accident?
Jack asked.
Did you know him?
Cameron glared at Tess a moment longer, then turned to Jack, her voice less angry.
No, if I did, he wouldn't have had the chance to throw me down the stairs. I'm pretty sure he didn't know me. I think you're right in that he thought I was Tess.
So how many people are involved in this?
Jack asked.
Tim always fancied himself a Danny Ocean.
Cameron said.
Who?
Daniel asked.
Ocean's 11, the movie?
Cameron clarified.
He usually had a team of people who were really good at one thing, like safe cracking or breaking into places.
So we're looking for 9 other people?
Daniel asked.
He wasn't that literal. There's him and Cal and the guy at the party. There will be at least one other who can provide legitimacy to the ring.
If Tim and Cal are in jail, who is leading this thing?
Tess asked.
I don't know.
Cameron said.
That part is odd. I wonder if Tim knows that someone is still after the ring because he would have been the leader.
Who would he use to legitimize the ring?
Daniel asked.
I would have said the auction house, but the auction for the ring hasn't occurred, and yet somehow you got the ring.
What about a jeweler?
Jack asked.
A jeweler would work too.
Cameron said.
Except the jeweler is dead.
Tess explained.
Dead?
We think your friends Tim and Cal killed him.
Daniel said.
Stop saying that!
Cameron yelled, then cringed and grabbed her head.
I'm not a part of this.
She finished weakly. Tess wanted to comfort her friend, but it wasn't time for that yet.
Can you give us any idea of how or where to proceed?
Jack asked.
I have a life to live and don't want to spend it looking over my shoulder for another one of their goons.
What if we put the ring up for sale?
Tess asked. Cameron shook her head.
No, whoever it is isn't going to buy it on a regular market. Not now. The auction house or jeweler who is in on the scam wouldn't actually offer it for auction or sale to the public, but the sale takes place behind the scenes. That can't happen now.
Mr. Feinstein's message was that the ring was for a private buyer. Maybe he was referring to Tim and Cal.
Tess reminded Jack and Daniel.
Except Feinstein is dead.
Jack said.
That doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't in on it.
Daniel said.
But if he was in on it, why did they have to drag him out of bed to open the safe?
Tess asked.
So maybe it was the son or Ricky?
Daniel said.
I'm not saying it wasn't Feinstein, but if they wanted the ring, they'd have been better off to wait to see if he could have retrieved it before killing him.
There'd be someone at the auction house too.
Cameron said.
If that's where the ring ended up, someone from there would need to pass it to the jeweler.
So we've got to look at Bigby, his assistant, and several other employees.
Daniel said.
It would be someone who had easy access to the items and paperwork.
Cameron explained.
That sounds like Bigby. His assistant didn't know anything about the ring.
Jack said.
Assuming she's telling the truth.
Tess said.
So there are at least 2 people we need to watch out for?
Jack asked.
At least,
Cameron confirmed. Jack reached for Tess's hand. Tess took it and saw her thoughts mirrored in his eyes. They weren't out of danger yet.
So you think Bigby or Diane is in on the scam?
Tess asked Daniel as they walked him to his car.
According to Diane, if they had the ring, it may have been mistakenly added to some other items. It's a pretty big mistake to accidentally misplace a ring worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Daniel said.
What did you pay for it?
Tess asked.
Not that much.
Jack said.
But how much?
He grinned.
You're not supposed to know.
She made a face at him. He winked.
I've got to go.
Daniel said, rolling his eyes. Once Daniel was on his way back to Jefferson Tavern, Jack took Tess's hand as they walked to their car.
So, how long have you spoken French and why didn't I know about it?
Are you impressed?
He stopped, pulled her into his arms.
I'm turned on.
Ah, c'est merveilleux.
Are you fluent?
I get by. I had a nanny who spoke French until my mom discovered her and my dad dormant ensemble sleeping together.
Tess clarified.
I took French in school and Cam and I used to speak it whenever we didn't want others to know what we were saying. She is fluent because she lives in France. I don't have much opportunity to speak it except with Césarière.
You can speak it to me anytime you want.
He waggled his brows.
You're like Gomez Adams.
Except I'll skip kissing the arm and head straight for the good stuff.
Which he did by planting a hearty, thorough kiss on Tess's lips. The weekend was uneventful, even for Jack and Tess. They discussed wedding plans and realized they'd need to return to Jefferson Tavern to take care of the details. Jack said he wanted another day or 2 in Washington to finish up a project with Brad. When he left for the office Monday morning, Tess knew he'd be gone all day. So when Helen Showalter called to say she was in town, Tess took advantage of the invite to lunch. She knew Jack wanted her to stay put, but she wasn't going to be a prisoner in his penthouse. Still, she wasn't stupid. She asked if Helen was willing to pick her up in the garage of the building. Hopefully, if someone was watching, they couldn't see inside the garage, and Tess figured she could duck or wear a hat as they left the building. The truth was that Tess missed Helen, not just since they'd been away from Jefferson Tavern, but since she and Jack had become an item. Tess wasn't sure if Helen's aloofness was due to picking Jack over Daniel, not that Tess would have ever chosen Daniel, or if it was because Helen's father, Senator Worthington, was Jack's biological father, a revelation that they'd all learned about only a few months earlier. Tess hadn't confronted Helen about the change, mostly because she didn't want to create more friction. For all intents and purposes, Helen was Tess's mother, even if she didn't give birth to her. If she could, she'd ask Helen to help her with the wedding. Despite the fact that she'd decided to ignore her parents' demands about a proper wedding, she couldn't quite bring herself to ask Helen to take over the mother duties. She knew Helen would feel the same. It was one thing to shun your parents or social protocol. It was another to snub them. Helen picked Tess up and drove her to Alexandria, Virginia, where they found a restaurant along the Potomac River.
I hear you got into more trouble,
Helen said once they were settled at their table.
A little. It wasn't us this time, but it was related to the ring.
Not that one, I hope.
Helen nodded toward Tess's hand.
No. The ring in question is in a safe until we decide what to do with it. Under the circumstances, I don't feel safe wearing it.
I should say not.
So Jack got me a new one.
She held it out for Helen to admire.
As long as you're safe, that's what matters.
Tess was disappointed Helen hadn't oohed and awed over the ring.
What brings you to Washington?
Tess pulled her hand back into her lap.
Dad. He's doing work on his apartment up here and wanted my advice. I told him he should wait until after the election next year, but you know him. Besides, he'll be there till he dies anyway.
Tess suspected Senator Worthington would be in office until he died as well, even if the news about Jack being his illegitimate son were released. Interestingly, it was Jack who wanted to keep the relationship out of the media. The waitress took their orders. Now that she was getting married sooner rather than later, Tess decided to order salad.
Do you have plans to return to Jefferson Tavern anytime soon?
Helen asked when the waitress left.
This week, we've decided to move up the wedding.
I didn't realize you had a date.
Tess heard the hurt in Helen's voice.
We only had a date for about a day. Then I had a tantrum, and Jack suggested we get married at home as soon as we could get someone to officiate.
How do you feel about that?
Helen asked.
I wanted to elope, but this will do.
And your parents, what do they think about it?
They don't know yet.
Tess said sheepishly.
But I've decided I don't care what they say. They weren't going to come anyway, which didn't stop Catherine from telling me I shouldn't marry Jack, or if I did, who I needed to invite, even though they wouldn't come either.
What's their problem with Jack?
It was the first time Tess heard Helen with a protective tone in reference to Jack.
He's rich. He's got connections.
He's got business connections, but not family.
Tess immediately wondered if she should have said that. Biologically, Jack's family included Helen and her father, the senator, who were very good connections.
So he still hasn't told anyone about...
Tess shook her head.
It's a difficult situation and doesn't have anything to do with you.
That wasn't completely true. Jack's immediate reaction to his possible relationship to the Worthingtons was a crisis of identity.
He didn't know he was adopted. His parents, Cora, they all lied to him. And...
Tess said, adding her own insight.
I think he feels it would betray his parents to accept someone else.
Helen sat back her chair and studied Tess.
So it's poor Jack.
Tess's eyes narrowed.
No, Helen, even you avoided being a part of your family. Why should you expect Jack, who never met your family until last year, and whose introduction to it was Asa, the brother you love to hate? Why should Jack open his arms to that?
Helen's lips twitched, and Tess couldn't decide if it was a smirk or amusement.
What?
Tess demanded.
I've tried to understand your dislike of Jack, even though I have no clue where it comes from. But I'm not going to let you belittle how devastating finding out the people he loves most lied to him, or suggest he's a bad person for not accepting your father when you yourself avoided your family whenever possible.
Not my father,
Helen said.
But you're right.
This time she did smile.
It's been a long time since I've seen this Tess. I've missed her.
What?
I have my reasons, and not very good ones, for how I feel about Jack. But it's hard not to like a man who's put the life back into you.
Tess blinked with bafflement. Had Helen just said she liked Jack?
When you came back from Washington 3 years ago, you put your life back together. But you were never really you. You went through all the motions, but you had no passion or life behind it. Jack gave that back to you, and for that reason alone, I have to like him.
Then why?
Helen sighed.
I know you think it's because of Daniel. As much as I'd love to have you as a daughter-in-law, I knew you'd never be with him, even if Jack never showed up. In fact, if it wasn't Jack, it probably would be no one, and that's sad. It's because of Dad. I know this family isn't Ozzie and Harriet, but Dad truly accepts Jack. He wants to have him in the family, even if it ruins his political career.
Do you know he accused Jack of cheating on me during that whole fiasco with Liv Danforth?
Tess asked.
How does a father do that?
I suspect it wasn't an accusation as more of a pat on the back, which I suppose is worse.
Character is important to Jack.
A real Boy Scout.
Helen said tongue-in-cheek.
He's not perfect, but he doesn't lie or cheat.
Helen shrugged. The waitress brought their food. Tess considered letting the conversation about Jack and the senator end there, but decided Helen needed a reality check.
Jack isn't saying he won't ever accept the senator. In fact, he feels guilty for not doing more because he knows the senator is sincere. That's why he keeps consulting with Philip, even though he'd rather not have anything to do with Worthington Media.
Helen's nephew, Philip, had taken over the company after her brother's death, and no one, not even Philip, expected him to do well. Helen's expression told Tess she hadn't known, which surprised Tess because she thought the senator would have said something.
The stipulation is that he needs to keep Lauren away from him.
Helen laughed.
My brother had the worst taste in wives, didn't he?
She pointed her fork at Tess as she added,
I always wondered why Philip hadn't bankrupted the company yet.
Jack needs time.
Helen set her fork down.
I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone.
Most people liked secrets, but Tess's insides said, uh-oh.
I knew Delia, Jack's biological mother. She worked for my dad. I also knew Jack as a baby. Of course, he wasn't named Jack then. It was Brady.
Is that a secret?
Tess asked.
No, but you know how hindsight is 20/20?
Tess nodded.
I think I knew back then that my dad was his father. He gave more attention to Delia and Jack than you'd expect him to give. He treated all his employees well, but there was something more with Delia. At the time, I ignored it. I was a teenager who saw her father's interest in other women as a betrayal, even though my mom had been dead for years.
He never remarried, did he?
Tess asked.
Would you want to be Ace's stepmom? Or mine at the time? I think he considered marrying Delia. That's something I've figured out since the secret became known. But, well, she left, and you know what happened next.
What happened next was that Delia was murdered by the senator's butler. Until a few months ago, everyone thought Delia's baby was murdered too. Everyone except for Jack's grandmother, Cora, who'd whisked him away and placed him for adoption.
I even babysat him once, which also should have been a clue. Since when do Worthingtons babysit the Help's children? But Dad asked me, and I did it even though I didn't want to. Agnes helped me.
A smile lifted on Helen's face.
He was a beautiful baby, crazy blue eyes. Agnes said they'd change, that all babies have blue eyes. But his never did they?
Tess shook her head.
No.
Helen reached out and took Tess's hand.
I've decided to look at it this way. If he does accept the family, that will make you my sister-in-law or half-sister-in-law.
A puzzled expression crossed Helen's face. Then she shook the confusion away.
Either way, we're officially related.
Tess felt the atmosphere lighten.
I guess we are.
I'm glad you came with me today. I knew we needed to talk. I was afraid I was alienating you.
Never.
Tess squeezed Helen's hand. They paused, realizing they'd come to a new place in their relationship. Then Helen pulled away.
Well, if you're getting married ASAP, you need a preacher. You should call Matt Michelson. He took over the church on the corner of Colonial and Patriot. A few months ago, it was going to close, but he came in, and now it's so crowded every Sunday, they're raising money to build a new church.
I didn't know you went to church there.
Tess resumed eating, happy now that tension between them was gone.
I don't. He volunteers at the Youth Charity Foundation. Tell him I told you to call. Oh, and I'll call Gertie McIntyre. Her daughter just started a catering company.
The one that went to cooking school?
Tess asked.
Yes, Gertie and I go way back, so I think we can get her daughter to help you.
I need to visit Césarier's as well. I need a trousseau.
Didn't you hear?
Helen asked.
She's closing the shop?
What?
There weren't many things Tess wanted to hear less than her favorite lingerie boutique was closing. Her mind raced to determine where'd she be able to buy her favorite delicates if Helen was right.
Why? She does so well.
I think it has something to do with her family.
Can't she sell it?
Who can sell underwear as well as Tess?
Helen stopped.
Except maybe for you.
Tess laughed at the idea.
I'm serious. You haven't reopened your law practice, which can only mean you don't want to. You love lingerie.
It's ridiculous.
But even as she said it, Tess wondered if maybe she could run a boutique.
It's not.
Helen insisted.
No one appreciates lingerie the way you do, except maybe the men who see it on their women. You should think about offering to buy it. I bet Césarier would love it. You're her favorite customer.
I might single-handedly keep her in business,
Tess admitted.
All the more reason to buy her shop.
It was crazy, except that Tess felt energized by the idea.
Think about it. And in the meantime, you need to tell your mom about your new plans.
Tess shook her head.
I'll call her, but you know her. She's not going to come.
She still needs to know. Who knows? Maybe she'll surprise you.
What's the saying, maybe pigs will fly?
You never know. Down in Bucks County, a man once swore his pig was driving the tractor.
Tess was barely in the door before Jack towered over her with a mad-as-hell expression.
Where have you been?
Tess started to explain how she'd asked Cora to let him know where she was if he came home earlier than expected.
I thought we discussed that you wouldn't go off on your own.
He interrupted. Tess peeked around him to see if Cora was still there. The tuft of bluish hair barely visible over the back of the couch told Tess she was, and she probably had a satisfied smirk on her face. Tess opened her mouth to explain when his phone chirped. He let out an expletive when he looked at the caller ID.
I have to take this, and then we're talking.
When he strode off to his office, Tess turned her sights on Cora. She sat on the back of the couch, acting nonchalant.
You didn't tell him I'd gone to lunch with Helen like I asked you to?
I'm old. I can hardly remember to put my teeth in. Besides, I'm no secretary.
That's okay. Jack and I will fight, but then you know what happens after we fight, don't you?
Tess turned her body so she could lean closer to Cora.
We make up.
Tess waggled her brows. Cora's face bunched.
Pervert!
She bolted, as fast as an 80-year-old woman could bolt off the couch and shuffled toward her apartment. Satisfied, Tess went to her office to call the minister Helen had referred. She was thrilled and overwhelmed when he said he'd had an opening in 3 weeks. That wasn't much time to throw together a wedding. She was writing a list of what needed to get done when Jack appeared in her doorway, still fuming. She wondered if he was trying to look intimidating on purpose. She considered telling him he looked sexy instead.
We're not going to have this talk, are we? You'll say you want me to stay put. I'll say I'm not going to lock myself away. I'll get mad and stomp off.
I'm blocking the doorway,
he said.
So I'll put my fingers in my ears and hum. Eventually, you'll give in and we'll end up naked. Maybe we skip the drama and go right to the naked part.
One dark brow rose. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe she was becoming more the woman she'd been before betrayal, and heartbreak had caused her to build walls.
Since when do I give in?
He said. Tess sighed and decided to try a new strategy, the one that usually worked for him. Distraction. She stood from her chair and walked to him.
Jacques, je t'aime de tout mon cœur. Tu es l'amour de ma vie. Je ne peux pas vivre sans toi.
I know what you're trying to do and it won't work. I'm stronger than that.
Tess smiled at the man whose expression belied his words. Speaking French was working as well as his dimple always worked on her.
Dis-moi que tu m'aimes aussi.
She slid a hand over his heart.
For all I know, you're telling me to take a flying leap.
Jacques, mon chéri, embrasse-moi.
She lifted her face to him, opened her mouth slightly so he'd know what she was asking. He stared at her, and for a moment, she thought her little seduction would fall flat.
Oh, what the hell?
He banded his arms around her, lifting her to him in a punishing kiss.
You're bad, you know that?
You have only yourself to blame.
She pressed a finger to the dimple that usually got him whatever he wanted.
So when does the nakedness begin?
And with that, the anger was gone, and Jack was back to his amiable self. She laughed.
Shortly. First, we need to discuss this wedding. We have a minister who can marry us in 3 weeks, unless you think that's too soon.
He grinned, spun her around, and planted another kiss on her. She took that as a good sign.
We'll need to get back to Jefferson Tavern soon if we're going to pull this off,
she said.
We can leave tomorrow. Now can we get naked?
He pulled her closer.
Almost. I want to bring Cam with us.
Why?
She gets out of the hospital tomorrow and she'll be going to the auction despite how bad it looks. I think we should go with her.
I thought our plan was to avoid the bad guys.
Your original plan was to find out what was going on.
That was before, but
He added before Tess could argue.
it might be good to have her around if more questions come up. Can you trust her?
Tess nodded.
I believe her story. And I think she can help with the case. Daniel will probably think so anyway.
Okay. Now can we get naked?
His lips skimmed a path from her earlobe, along her collarbone to the soft spot at the base of her neck.
I need to do one thing first before it gets too late. I want to call Césarier. Helen said she's closing the boutique.
Closing? Why?
I guess she's going back to France.
Why not sell it? It does good business. You alone can keep that place in the black.
Yeah, well,
His head jerked back as if he'd just realized something.
You want to buy it, don't you?
no.
She waved his comment away. She stepped out of his arms and went to her desk. As much as the idea appealed to her, it just was too crazy.
Yes, you do, and why not? You've been looking for something you can get passionate about. There aren't many people more passionate about underwear than you, Tess.
You like it too.
She tossed back.
I like it on you, and then off you.
He reached for her, pulling her to him.
It's perfect.
She bit her lower lip.
It does sound fun.
Then it's settled. Will you model all the inventory for me?
His eyes gleamed, and his dimple was at full salute. How could she say no to that? Tess laughed.
It's crazy, though.
Why? Because your parents will be mortified. At this point, that would be a bonus, don't you think?
Yes, but
But nothing. The Tess I met 4 years ago would have jumped at this.
He was right. In the last 3 years, she lived a safe, comfortable, boring life. But the need for that was gone. Now she wanted to pursue something fun and frivolous.
you really think I can do it?
He snorted.
Tess, no one else could do it as well as you will. Call Césarier.
He kissed her on the forehead, then turned to leave.
Jack,
She called after him. He turned.
this will just take a few minutes, so if you want to get naked,
He grinned.
You know where to find me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tales from the Heart. I hope that you enjoyed it, and you'll be back to find out what happens next. Is Tess going to buy Césarier's boutique? And what will happen at the auction? Now, remember, you can listen to full uncensored episodes over at reamstories.com/Jenna Harte. Just click the follow button and then select With This Ring I Thee Kill audio for all the episodes. If you'd like to read along or get ahead in the story, you can get With This Ring I Thee Kill from your favorite ebook retailer, or you can save by buying direct from me. All the details and links you might need are just a click away in the description. Now, don't miss the next episode. Hit the subscribe button so that you know when it's posted. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, this is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.